People who have studied with convicted killers. How are they like in school? My older brother sat next to a dude in homeroom every day for 4 years of high school. Years later, when I was going to the same school, that dude my brother sat next to was involved in a big plot where he was having an affair with a married woman and they conspired to kill the husband. Did him with a shovel, just off a path a lot of kids used to walk to get to/from school. We got locked down one afternoon when the dogs found the shallow grave after a kid cut in class saw a shoe or something emerging from the dirt. Anyway, my brother has always maintained this guy was totally normal. None of the classic killer traits. Friendly enough, good for a joke, had a couple of tight friends, and never did anything obviously sketchy. Sat next to this kid for 4 years in homeroom. Found out a year later, after we graduated, he had killed his father with a hammer. I talked to him almost every 5 minutes. Never seemed abnormal, but there's something about him that I never really hung out with him outside of homeroom. He never talked about what was going on at home. Couldn't really believe it. Went to an all-girls Catholic school. It was small, so you get to know most of the other students. There was a sweet, quiet girl in the trade below me. A bit shy, but overall personable and nice. Had a good sense of humor and friends. I think 6 years after high school, her and her boyfriend just decided they wanted to try murdering someone. So she called her police friend to meet her for a hike in the middle of nowhere, and they killed her. Very odd. Really odd kid I went to middle school with beat his mom to death with golf clubs. We all knew he was odd. Mean, fidgety, always talking to himself, which turned out to be voices in his head. He needed help way before he did that. Sadly, mental health is hardly addressed with disturbed children. In no way am I defending the child, but I'm sure his family was aware that he was disturbed. I obviously don't know if he was getting treatment, but I assume not. It's always best to homeschool in serious cases. The anxiety of not being normal and still trying to feel accepted is extremely stressful, and school is already stressful enough. If you notice a disturbance in your child, early intervention is the best thing you can do for them. Learning coping skills is vital. This is coming from a paranoid schizophrenic who was diagnosed in my late 20s. I never talked to my parents about my struggle because they had a very rub dirt on it attitude towards everything. Now I'm fucked up and it's too far over their heads to understand how I managed to hide it as a kid. They still don't fully comprehend the extent of my illness and refuse to listen. At least my mom knows now. I was raped by my paternal uncle as a child. I couldn't tell her then. We weren't close. I learned about periods in 8th grade for fuck's sake. Went to high school with a guy who killed his girlfriend, her dad, her 16-year-old brother, then his own parents. He tried to get away by driving multiple states, but his family he was driving to turned him in before he got there. He always seemed a bit unstable and did commit petty crimes like shoplifting and whatnot, but I guarantee no one thought he was capable of this. He was nice to mostly everyone, just a bit of an off-kittler. Weirdo more concerned with getting high and dicking around than anything else. I never would have thought he'd go on a spree killing like that. It really makes me sad to think about. The case hasn't had an official ruling yet, but they're considering the death penalty for him. This kid wasn't convicted, but he did kill someone. If I remember correctly, a couple years out of high school, he ran someone over. A pedestrian walking across the street. His parents were some of the rich farmers. Weird concept, I know, but there's some of them in town, and he got out of it somehow. He was one of the dumbest people I've ever seen when we were in school together. He was a year younger, from what I know. He wasn't on the spectrum or disabled in any way. He just did not give a shit about anything. He would ride his lawnmower everywhere instead of walking, if he could. Actually drove to school sometimes. In physical science class, a friend told me about him not understanding a lunar eclipse. When the teacher explained it, he said, "The sun goes behind the moon every night." It derailed the rest of the class period and nothing was learned that day. I went to elementary school for a year or so with the guy who killed Whitney Bulger in prison. We weren't close, but we played at recess and stuff like that. He was kinda goofy and seemed like a good kid. He definitely was not a bully type or someone who caused trouble. There was this guy who lived on my dorm floor during college, who ended up murdering his wife when he found out she cheated on him. He was a douche. He'd always brag about how he was gonna be just like his uncle and have multiple wives, and how he's banging these Indian chicks, and some loser Indian guy is gonna end up marrying his used toys, while he's gonna end up marrying a virgin. Plus, he was super racist. Stuart Dawson, the guy who killed his mom and ate her, plus his dog too, was a weird guy. He would say weird stuff all the time and do childish things. I never knew he would become a cannibal killer though. As gruesome as the murder was, the papers and news has kept this as quiet as possible. Very few people know about this guy. I think he overstepped the typical murder mark and became taboo and swept under the carpet. He threw himself off a tall bridge sometime after, killing his mom, and landed on a roof, only to survive, and then I think 20 years later was released into the public again, only to jump off the same roof and this time kill himself. His mind was screwed up. I never liked him. Went to high school with the dude that seemed to have it all. Cheerleading captain, homecoming king, and an all-around very nice guy. He was one of the more popular kids, and I hung out with the goth crowd, so we kinda hated each other. Before graduating high school, he attempted to get into the military through ROTC, but for reasons I don't know, was not accepted. Anyways, maybe a month or two after our graduation, he decided he wanted to be in a gang. So, as some sort of initiation, a gang member drove him up to a main entrance to Walmart and told him to gun anyone down. He killed some random couple coming out with bags of groceries for their kids. Piece of shit tried to get a Kickstarter to help fund his bail. Actually got a few donations. Fuck that guy. Ran cross country. Practiced same time as the girls' team. This girl one day wasn't picked up by her parents after practice, and I usually ended late. When I finished, I saw her alone. I was concerned. She confided in me her mother was drunk and very cruel and abusive. She cried and hugged me. First time we had ever spoken. My mother arrived and we gave her a ride home. She talked to me more after that. I developed a crush on her suddenly. She stopped coming to school. Years later, we saw her on the news for luring her mother to an abandoned trailer and murdering her with a kitchen knife. I feel bad every day that I didn't see the warning signs and help her. Similar story. I was friends with a girl who had a very cute, sweet little brother. There was always something weird about the dad, but I was too young to understand. We couldn't play inside if the dad was home, couldn't go in his office, etc. Well, I lost touch with him about 25 years later. The little brother beat the dad to death. Apparently, dad has been mean, drunk, and physically abusive their whole lives. Little brother inherited dad's relationship with alcohol and was living at home. Couldn't take the abuse anymore, and one bad night, when they were both hammered, bashed his head repeatedly. I don't know if this counts, but I went to grade school and high school with a guy who would later go on to murder someone. He had a bad home life from what I know. He was also a strangle kid in grade school. He switched high schools, but I would see him from time to time on the bus and we would catch up. He joined a gang and was in and out of jail for a few years after that. I lost touch with him and then later found out he was charged for manslaughter a few years later. I'll never forget the last time I ran into him. It was around the end of November and he was going through a trial and knew he was going to be serving jail sentence through Christmas, so he was trying to tie loose ends before going in. He seemed mournful, as if he had wanted to change his life. I guess not. I went to high school with this guy that was super friendly and outgoing. He was a good student in all the same honor/AP classes as me. Fun to be around, kind of a goofball. Seemed like a wholesome, fun kind of guy. He went to college and killed his girlfriend and kept her in the closet for a while. It wasn't quite studying for him, but one of my best friends is a convicted killer. I can testify as to his behavior in school because I didn't go with him, but I grew up with him. Played after school with him at my house or his, called his mom, Mom. He killed 2 people in a gang-related shooting in Louisiana. He's not a bad guy, he was just lost in the life. I write to him every week. Sociopathic jerk who bullied everyone who was smaller than him. Went to jail for beating a man's face in, then ripping out his eyeballs while he was alive. But it's okay. It was a small religious town, so everyone forgave him. Dude from my high school actually just killed another dude from my high school last week. The guy was always a quiet, kinda emo kid that wore the same hoodie every day and had hair that covered his eyes. Sophomore year, he did something that got him shipped off to alternative. And I remember arguing with one of the girls who told me, "You just don't know him." Thankfully not, since he killed someone who was a pretty nice dude. One of my teachers in my community college committed a double murder-suicide. The victims were his teenage sons, all to get back at his wife as they went through a messy divorce. The school actually shut down for the rest of the week. Guy was kinda off at first, but within the acceptable boundaries for a bunch of high school nerds. Frequent member of the lunchtime D&D group, but not someone we hung around with outside school. We gradually realized he was a thief and a pathological liar, and completely lacking in empathy. He got shunned after things started going missing, and pretty much fell off the radar by junior year. Rumor was he'd been relegated to one of the special schools. A few weeks before high school graduation, one of my friends, not super close, but a guy who had been part of the lunchtime D&D group, disappeared. Turned out, Psycho Kid and another dropout had killed him for his tax refund and buried him in a shallow grave, currently 35 years into a life sentence. Not me, but one of my older brothers was in a class with a boy who was often violent and seemed rather twisted. He would poke pins into people's arms when he sat behind them, etc. He then one day attempted to tie my brother's arm to a desk and burn him with a Bunsen burner, which is used in science classes, laboratories, etc. He later bludgeoned a young woman to death, attempted to dispose of her body with chemicals at home, then ultimately hid her inside of a barrel, where she was found. I also went to school with the killer's younger sibling, who claimed that he was kicked out of the family home. Caused the parents to divorce, both over his violent tendencies and fear he would harm them, and often would try to torture the younger siblings physically and mentally. All the signs were there, but every attempt and outreach for help by the family to the school and health professionals were ignored. My aunt is a teacher for 4th graders, and there's kids like this, and they just ignore him. When he was in 2nd grade, his parents would have to lock him in his room because they were so scared of him and what he would do. He smashed his head into his desk because he didn't get what he wanted, and he would also try to use scissors to cut people. Guy 2 grades behind me, same high school, threw his own baby in a super hot bath, killing it. Dude was physically awkward and light on confidence, but otherwise normal. Well, attempted murder and arsonist. A kid in my marching band section tried to burn his parents alive while they slept. He was also a small skinny white kid who acted like a tough guy even though he lived in upper middle class suburbia. He was such a wimp and would insist on using the lighter equipment that was usually reserved to an injured person or a senior girl. He was angry at his parents because they took away his phone, and he went around and told people that he was going to kill them. But I guess no one took him seriously. He literally wrote out his plan on paper. He took some ropes and tied their bedroom door shut, and then used lighter fluid to set the house on fire before fleeing. Luckily, they woke up in time and were able to escape through the bedroom window with no more than a broken leg. None of that, he was a nice, quiet kid. This asshole was a POS from the moment he entered 1st grade. He was a good bit bigger than everyone and just bullied the shit out of other kids. He was the same way all through high school and wound up getting into selling drugs. Supposedly, a guy tried to rip him off and bully dude pulled out a gun on him. Rip-off guy had one too, and shit got stupid. Not entirely sure this last part is true, but supposedly, the reason he was caught is because during the investigation, they caught him in camera wearing his high school football jersey with this name across the back. Editor of the yearbook and school paper, in lots of clubs. She was also a cheerleader for a year or two. I was friends with her, so my freshman year, I show up too many times in the yearbook. She went to college and got into drugs, dropped out, moved to Cali and became a sex worker, got deeper into drugs, and then her and some other people tried to kill 2 people. They only succeeded in killing one, all over credit card fraud, but it's weird to think that we would always partner up for sharing hotel rooms when we would travel for FBLA. Never would have guessed what the girl jumping on the bed next to me would grow up to be. I sat in front of a convicted killer in high school math for 1 year, about a year before he committed the murder. He was popular, but pretty angry and hated our teacher, and would mutter under his breath a lot. I remember being asked something by a teacher, and he leaned up and whispered to me, "Just tell him to shut up." I laughed, not realizing he was probably serious. He eventually killed another kid because he thought the kid was gay. I didn't see it coming, but in hindsight, I wasn't surprised. Like, I never felt in danger around him, but he was still uncomfortable to be around. My brother went to high school with a guy who murdered his grandmother and his aunt with an axe to get a jump start on his inheritance. He said he was really quiet and hung around just one friend, who was his accomplice in the axe murders. About 20 years later, my brother got a contract job at a tech company in the same city where we grew up, and he told us about this strange guy who worked there. He said that when this guy made a mistake, he was reprimanded by his supervisor. He would have these muted, quiet conversations with himself in his cubicle, and he would curse and threaten to kill people, then talked himself down. My brother said he was weirded out by it, and he asked the owner what kind of reference check he did on this guy. The owner said he didn't, so my brother ran his name through Google, and it was the same guy who killed his grandmother and aunt. My brother terminated his contract with them. He said he didn't want to be around if the guy went off again. Had this guy bully me in middle school. Call me stupid because I was quiet and too shy to stand up for myself. He didn't have any early signs of a psychopathic killer or anything. He was just a kid who cut it up in class and eventually got into the wrong crowd. I don't think he finished high school. After I graduated, I heard he and a group of guys beat a man to death. Sad. The sons, yes plural, of a local drug kingpin. They were the go-to dealers in high school for hard drugs, mostly meth and heroin. They ended up killing one of their customers, thinking he was a snitch, shot him with a crossbow, chopped him up, and failed to hide the body in an old mining town because they were too high. Ended up being caught on camera. Dad and the oldest son are out of jail because of COVID. Younger son got off because the other two confessed and took the fall. They are also suspects in no less than 6 unsolved drug-related killings in the area. I went to grammar school with a kid who later shot 2 cops. He was a regular kid during grammar school. He played sports, he played baseball with us. He passed in school every year and didn't hang with the rough crowd because there were some kids at our school who were 8 balls, but he was not one of them. Strange. Played ball with a guy a while back. He was set to get a scholarship and be a big name. Then he killed his folks and left them in the pool. Not sure why, but boy, he could throw fast. I was in class with a dude who later carried out a terror attack. He was quiet and unremarkable. He insisted on doing his final report on prison rape. Listening to the presentation was pretty weird. A kid I went to grade school slit 2 people's throats and lit their bodies on fire, while high on meth, of course. He used to shit and piss his pants all the way through grade 6/7. Other than that, he was fairly normal, maybe a bit on the wild side and not good at school, but the shitting the pants was weird. I went to school with this girl who got arrested for handcuffing her children to their bed at night. Their mattresses were heavily soiled. She was odd and acted up behind closed doors, I guess. She also lived most of her life in foster care with multiple other children. It's really sad. Lack of parental figure left a void she didn't know how to fill, I guess. In elementary school, there was a student who acted a little twitchy, heavily guarded, had a paranoid look to him. His home life included his parents going through a very messy divorce. This same guy would later burn down a historical train yard that was being used as a restaurant at the time. The fire was so large that only 1/3 of the building was recognizable. Not exactly a homicide, but I think it's close enough. My primary school bully is doing 20 years for attempted murder. He was a total dick back then, never called me by my real name, only his cruel insult name. sprayed me in my eyes with Binaca, kicked me in the kidneys when I was getting something out of my locker. Not surprised. A few guys who were in my grade were involved in a drug deal with a friend's brother, the dealer plus older, and it ended up turning south. One killed the dealer. As far as I know, the one with the gun plus did the shooting is still locked up. Another one is turning his life around in a different state. He actually stopped another friend who was lighting a cigarette for me to smoke for the first time. He saved me from starting smoking at a younger age. He was a very jolly person, but bad academically, and would get into tussles with teachers and other authority figures, but got along very well with fellow students. He seemed more, I'm not sure if that's the word, mature than the rest of us. Shortly after high school, he murdered another kid who was a year senior to us over some car plus money, and got caught. Very sordid affair. He, along with a friend, killed a servant with a gun, and then said student was strangulated by him with a water hose. A kid from my high school murdered someone as part of a gang initiation. He is currently serving life in prison. We had a class together for a couple of years. He was super hilarious, sweet, smart, and the teacher really liked him. Definitely a tragic situation all around. I was friends with this guy in elementary school. We hung out in the same circles. He was fun, didn't seem weird. As we got older, he kind of turned into a stoner, but honestly seemed like your typical guy. Didn't seem overly aggressive or anything. A few years ago, he killed his 80-something-year-old neighbor during a nighttime break and looking for prescription meds. I don't think he's convicted yet, but it's not a question of if he did it, just a question of how long can they drag out the case. Kid I went to school with bludgeoned someone to death. I'll keep it vague. Anyways, he was normal for the most part, but eventually got a reputation for getting really weird when he drinks. I wasn't overly shocked when he killed someone. Went to school with a kid that was always strange, generally awkward, liked pain, giving and receiving. A couple years after we left high school, he was arrested for attempted murder. He was with a hooker doing drugs in a cheap motel, and she was apparently overdosing. Apparently, to ensure that she actually died, he slit her throat and left. Apparently, he did a shit job of it and was an idiot because she then woke up and used the phone he left behind to call 911. She survived, went to trial. This kid was the son of a very prominent local lawyer and got off with like 2 years jail time. So technically, not a murder, but not for lack of trying. A girl I went to junior high with attempted to murder her ex-boyfriend this summer. She's been quite a weird kid. Her hygiene was really bad. You could smell her hair from several feet, and her breath was horrible. She had the worst grades in our class, failing almost everything, and would spend the lessons drawing shitty art related to Teen Wolf in her notebooks. She was very quiet and didn't make effort to contact anyone. I've tried to be friendly since I was far from popular. I remember her being very shocked when she found out I wasn't interested in drinking at 14. She would also skip school a lot. I'm pretty sure she failed 3 or 4 times before dropping out. He was an honor roll student, taking a lot of AP classes throughout high school. I took a couple with him. Bright kid, knew how to get the grades. Was also the son of one of the members of the school district board. 19 years later, in 2016, he shows up on the news. An altercation with the roommate over something in the house they shared led to the killing of the roommate. He later took police on a long car chase, followed by a shootout, injuring 2 officers after they pulled off a pit maneuver. Never would have seen this coming. Shocked all of my former high school classmates. No telling what changed within those 19 years. I went to school and was in the Boy Scouts with the guy who was executed by the state for murder. Super nice guy that was willing to help anyone. He was older and was a great role model for us younger kids. I still don't believe he did it, and there were some inconsistencies with his case. He was accused of having an affair with and murdering his boss's wife. He was also popular with girls, so I don't doubt the affair. He just wasn't the brightest bulb ever. I believe the husband discovered the affair and framed him for the murder. There were just too many circumstances that didn't make sense. It doesn't matter now because the state already executed him. Really nice guy. with the good kind of popular in high school. Grew up and went to school with a girl who hired someone to successfully kill her boyfriend. She was always a nut job. I worked with a guy who also did time for murder. He got in a bar fight. He ended the fight, the guy fell funny, hit his head, that was it. Jail seemed to humble him. The girl I sat next to in science class in middle school is in prison for shooting, stabbing, and burning a woman who was pregnant by her ex. And she tried to have that ex killed too. I remember her as being pretty friendly.